Hey guys, I'm Cody the Coder. Today I'm going to show you how to program Blackjack in JavaScript. So here I have the same stuff that I had in my last video. I've got Google Chrome over here on the right and an HTML file with nothing but body and script tags over here on the left. This is just to double check that JavaScript is working. Yes. Cool. So the first thing that we need in Blackjack is probably the deck. So a deck of Blackjack cards. To make things easier, I'm just going to use the integer values. So there's that's 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. So I'm just going to use the integer values of the different cards. If we want to make it more complicated, then you could actually make like a string for every card in the deck. That would be something like probably 2H for 2 of hearts, 3H. But that would make things more complicated, so we're not going to do that. Cool, so we've got the deck here. It's an array. An array is a common data structure where you can access the different cards in the deck, as I'm sure you remember from the last lesson, with their index. So console.log deck of 0, and then deck of, it should be 52. It'll be 51. The 51st index should be the last card. So let's see. Yeah, so that is logging out this 2 and this 11. Cool. So now that we have the deck, what we want to do is create a function draw random card deck. So here I declared the function. I used camel case and I put in yeah, no, I'm not going to cut that. I'm not a professional YouTuber. I only have 1 subscriber. So anyway, so now we draw a random card. So that means we should get a random math.random deck.length times 52. Oh no, deck.length times math.random. So math.random will create a random number from 0 to 1. And then we want math.floor to make sure we round this to the nearest integer. So this gets the length of the deck. It's normally going to be 52. It's going to be something like 52 times 0.1 or something. But the fact that we're rounding it every time means that we're going to get a different integer, which is within the deck, within the length of the deck every time. So at a beginner level, you normally you'll be tempted to use these kind of intermediary variables a lot because that way you can have a clear idea of what you're doing. So it would be return deck of random index. So now let's just log the output of draw random card deck a couple times, or just 1 time I guess, and then double check to make sure that everything is working. Missing after argument on line 10. Yeah, so we had 1 extra parentheses there that we didn't need. 8, 10, 11. Yeah, so it looks like I'm just hitting refresh in the browser, Command R, Apple R, to run this multiply button. So yeah, it looks like it's returning a random number every time, which is quite good. So now we need a player hand and a dealer hand. So we can just use arrays for this. So now to start the game, function start game, we need to assign 2 cards each to the player and the dealer. So player hand, oh actually, the way I did this before, player hand equals an array, and you can call functions from inside an array, and we're not removing the cards. Oh, actually, we should probably declare it up here. There's something called variable scoping, where variables only count within a certain scope. So, for example, if we declare this variable within the start game function, we might not have access to it outside of the start game function. And I think it's safe to use global variables at this point. I don't think we need to worry about it. So these are considered global variables because they're at the highest scope. Every function has its own scope, and variables that you declare within the function are within that scope and often scoped to that. So here we're drawing a random card for both the player hand and the dealer hand. So we're drawing two random cards for the player hand and the dealer hand, and now we are assigning them inside the start game function. So if we call start game, I'm not sure if we want to like concatenate the player hand to this string. I'm not sure if that would even work. I'm not sure if JavaScript would know how to do that, because this is an array data type and this is a string data type. Okay, yeah, so actually it did know how to do that. So JavaScript is smart. Dealer hand. Cool, yeah, so now as you can see, we have a random hand of two cards getting dealt out every time we run the program, which is exactly where we want to be. Get rid of this rogue console log. Normally, you want to organize things in a certain way, so it makes sense to do all of your like variable assignments up here at the top, then do your function assignments after that, and then do the other stuff below that. So now we want to be able to so in Blackjack you want 21. So we want to be able to calculate the value of a hand. So to calculate the value, get hand value, hand. So we want to add up 3 and 10 and then return the value of the hand. So that means that hand we want to iterate over each card in the hand, and then we want to add up, yeah, that looks good. And then we want to add up the value. So the sum is going to start off at 0, and then we're going to use a for loop here. So start the for loop at 0, iterate up to the length of the hand. This doesn't go over the length because arrays are 0 indexed. So if we have a hand of 2, the length will be 2, and that means that this will run for I equals 0 and I equals 1. But it won't run for I equals 2 because once this condition is no longer true, that terminates the loop. So once I equals 2, that means we're going to break out of the loop, and we're not going to try to access, the undefined it's the third index in the array. So let's see here. So sum equals sum plus hand of I. You can also, a shorthand for that is like this in JavaScript and most languages. And then once we terminate from the loop, we should return the sum. So now we want to test to make sure that it works. Player hand value, get hand value of player hand. And the same thing for the dealer hand value. Yeah, I should make sure I'm charging my phone. Let's see here. These phones just don't hold a charge nowadays, do they? Yeah, so here we go. I'm plugging in my phone. You know, just because you're a coder doesn't mean that you want to ignore the rest of the world. If anything, you need to talk to the rest of the world more using the power of technology, and that's what I'm doing. So, let's see here. Save it, and okay, 10 plus 10 is 20, 6 plus 10 is 16, 6, 13. Looks like we're in good shape. That print is kind of wonky. There we go. Yeah, so I just want to make sure that they all print on one line so it's easier to read. Yeah, so now we have get the value of the hand. Now we want to we'll create a button for hit. On click equals hit. So this on click means that we will call the function named hit when we click it. So yeah, so a lot of the time it's a good idea to just kind of randomly make sure that the event listener gets called before you are building anything else on top of that. So this will double check to make sure that we're actually calling the function every time we click the button, and then we're going to actually write the hit button afterwards. This way, it's not like you write the entire function. It's not like you write the entire function. You're like, huh, the event listener isn't working. Oh, what's going on? So yeah, it looks like hit is being called effectively. So now when we call hit, what we need to do is we need to push a new card to the player hand. These are global variables, so we should be able to access them here. So you'll notice that I'm not removing the cards from the deck that we're drawing. And we could do that, but normally in Blackjack, if you ever go to a casino or something, they've got like 8 decks. So it's actually pretty common for you to have new cards or duplicate cards in your hand or in the dealer hand. So console.log player hand, new player hand. Yeah. Cool, yeah, so it looks like that's working pretty reliably. Except, we also want to make sure that we're getting the hand value when we hit. So get hand value of player hand. And then we want to write an if. So if get hand value of player hand is greater than 21, console.log bust. Okay, we busted. Cool. So yeah, these are the basics of Blackjack. I'm not sure what the opposite of hit is. I think it's called stand. Okay. Those are just YouTube prank videos. I'm not watching videos to teach me how to pick up girls. Obviously not, but what are the calls in Blackjack? So I think it's stand. Yeah, it's stand. So we also push a button that says stand. Or we create a button called stand. Cool, so we've got the bust. I was thinking it would be good if instead of reflecting this information in the console, we could actually reflect it in okay, so start game. So we have a player hand div, and now we have a dealer hand div. And I think it's convention when you're naming CSS. This is considered a CSS selector, the ID. I think it's common convention to use these with a hyphen. So now we want to write something that instead of console logging this stuff, we're instead going to write it to the DOM. DOM is document object model. That just refers to all of the elements that are present in HTML and the way that they contain one another and intersect kind of in like a tree. So see, even when you're a pro programmer, there's no reason for you to memorize a bunch of stuff. You know, everything is always just a Google away. So, okay, so here we get the element up. So this goes to document, gets the element by ID, and here we're going to get the player hand, and we're going to set the player hand to be the value of the player hand variable that we have up here. And now we're going to get the dealer hand and do the same thing for that. So now we should be able to actually create kind of like a web application. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to write an array to the DOM like this. I'm just going to see what happens and see if that works. Nope, cannot set property inner HTML of null. Okay, yeah, so we've actually run into a bit of a problem here. Code always gets executed from top to bottom, and we're calling the script before the HTML elements are getting defined. So we were trying to set we were trying to set the value of a div that hadn't been rendered yet. So let's see what happens now. 2, 6, 10, 10. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Okay, yeah, so I wondered why there was only one set of numbers coming through, and that was because we're writing to player hand twice instead of also to dealer hand. And you know, I mean, this is the ugliest plain HTML that you can have. But it's always important like to work out the logic and the nuts and bolts before you try to work on the front end and make things pretty. So h2 player hand. Oh, actually, that was in the JavaScript. So h2 is header 2 tag. It's the second largest header. The largest header is header 1. Cool. So the player hand is 9.3 and the dealer hand is 2.8. Maybe we should also print the hand value here. See, the thing is we already did this earlier. We already worked out some of this logic. So for us to print it to the HTML, We can just use the same inner HTML function on everything, so it's actually pretty easy to do. Dealer hand value, player hand value. And now here below dealer hand, we do dealer hand value. And here we can do get hand value of dealer hand. Okay. Maybe we should kind of delineate that that is the value, because I think it's a little bit unclear because we just player cards, player hand value, dealer cards, dealer hand value. Cool, yeah, so it doesn't look pretty, but at least we can tell what's going on, and we can actually probably get rid of all these console logs now, because we don't need them, and it actually looks like everything is working pretty good over here. So this is pretty common. You're going to write something, print it out to the console, and then write it to the web page after you've managed to work out how everything works in the console. So let's see what comes next. So if the player hits, then he busts. So let's make a div. Let's make a game div that wraps around all of the hand values. And then if they bust, let's write over all of the hand values the value of bust. Ooh, but that's actually... So if we do that, then it's going to overwrite all of these divs that we have, which are necessary to play the game. It's just going to write over all of this HTML with the word bust, and that's not going to allow us to play multiple games. So one option would be to hide these divs, and the more primitive, easier option is just to write down here. Let's make this game status, and then down here, let's make the game status be bust. So write game status of bust. See, bust. Pretty good. Cool. So this is the end of Cody the Coder